Welcome to the garage today. Today we got a fun one that's budget G-body suspension that handles. So let's say you've got a 78 Bonnie, Grand Prix, Cutlass, Regal, Malibu, El Camino, or any other G-body, or if you're one of those snobs that says, I've got a 1979. It's not a G-body. It's an A-body. Yes, this still applies to you. It's a 78 to 88 full-frame GM. Most people know that's a G-body, or if you go roundy around on dirt, it's metric, but it's a G-body. So, what you're looking for, say you got your G-body. You're looking for something that makes your car handle a little bit better. So, you know, you got your boat. You know, that's stock G-body range around here. You know, you're full on the high seas. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got your little red wagon. And that's like rattle your teeth out. And that's like your toupee flies off when you go over a jump. So you stock G-body's there. You might want to be like, you know, here. You don't want your teeth to fall out, but you want to handle a little bit better. And cost-wise, you know, this is one of those like $4,000 kits that you buy that have all your fancy control arms, your sway bars. You know, it comes in a box. UPS guy hates you. It costs like $4,000. It's like 1,800 pounds of boxes that show up. You go scrap all your control arms. Like, I mean, that's fine if you want to go fight against Corvettes, but, you know, you're just looking for something comfortable down here. You want to take your car out on the weekend with your family, go get some ice cream, maybe turn a corner and not feel like you're going to go into the weeds. And you don't have, you know, that's a lot of dollar signs. You know, you're more like, you own a G-body. You know, you're not an A-body, a 68 Chevelle person. You know, you got like one, maybe $2 signs in your wallet. You know, you've got kids and house and things to pay for. So, you know, what's something that, you know, gets your boat down to here, but you're not quite Little Red Wagon. You get your cost, you know, somewhere like here. You know, $1.50 sign, maybe $2, but none of that $3 sign stuff. Well, we'll cover a couple things, and hopefully you can save some money here. Make your G-body handle on a budget. Okay, so the meat and potatoes. The piece de resistance, why you're here. I got a list here, some graphs and some plots and some diagrams and some numbers and some drawings. Well, before you get too confused, I'm just going to break it down by number and go from there. So, the first key to make your G-body handle is address your wear. So you got that thing on your dash called an odometer. Does it say, you know, 78,465? Does it say 23,000? Cool. Maybe there's supposed to be a 1 there. Maybe you got like 120,000 miles. These cars are old, they have miles on. Things like your tie rod ends are probably shot. Your tires are probably waving around like the wacky arm blow up waving guy at the used car lot where the sleazy guy sells all the old drug running cars and stuff that got repoed. You know, those tie rods are probably shot. Bushings, they're probably not much better. Your things like your drag links on your steering. What about your upper and lower ball joints? You know, that's something to think about. And shocks. Do you have parts store shocks like a Monroe? I bought Monroe ones before. They're like blown by 5,000 miles. The only ones that I found that are effective and actually last are KYB gas adjusts. And you can pick them up for about $100. I guess the price has probably been up, but you know, that's $100. Or Bilsteins. You know, if you want to look like a German Tweety Bird or Big Bird that got into a fight with the Blue Man Group. You know, it got that yellow, that Tweety Bird yellow and that Blue Man Group blue. You know, you see them under there, but those Germans, They do stuff good. Look at upgrading those things before you even go into anything else. There's a good chance something there might be causing some issues with your car. Okay, step 2, springs. Biggest issue with G-bodies and why they ride like boats are the front spring rate and the free height. So stock, think long and soft, channeling your inner middle schooler. Think of all those bad innuendos you can think of. They got soft 350 pounds per inch. That boat ride, you hit that bump or that dip, ooh, you don't even feel them. Free height 15.5, that's a long spring, so you got a lot of stored energy height. Your new springs, you want them short and stiff, 600 pounds per inch, something maybe like a 13-inch free height. That's kind of more of a G-body spring up top, and down there, that's more of like a Firebird or a Camaro, an S10, like a four-wheel drive S10. Some springs that are good options are like Moog 56, 58s, 60s, 64s. You can definitely go with a aftermarket 3-letter acronym spring company, and those are fine. But springs are generally springs. Some people have issues with ride heights. You're gonna have to guess and check depending on what your car weight is, tire size, etc. But meat and potatoes, why do these springs, boat, and these springs provide a better, more sporty, but still reasonably comfortable ride? Well, got kind of some plots here. So the stock springs, that's full drop and that's full bump stop. So think when your car's on jack stands, they're full drop. When you hit a big bump, they're full bump stop. So your stock springs, that solid black line here, ride height, if your car is all consistent, it doesn't matter what spring rate you have in, you have a known pound on the front end, let's say 2,000 pounds, you're going to end up with your ride height. But when you hit a bump with a stock spring, there isn't a lot of spring rate. So those springs compress easily and you hit your bump stop. We'll hit that bump stop and then your springs shoot energy back. And your shocks, if they're blown, or even if they're just not quite managing, you still have a lot of stored energy here on that rebound. So that's why your car kind of floats and oscillates, got that motion of the ocean. But a new spring, and these are $40 to $80, $90 for pairs, differ slope. So when you hit a bump, it's going to be more firm. But if you hit a drop or a pothole or something where your suspension goes down, you don't have a ton of stored energy down here. So it's going to be a little bit harder feeling ride, but it's going to prevent it from boating like a boat and floating around. So address your springs after you address your worn out suspension parts. Step 3, your sway bars. You don't want to have off-road sway bar disconnects. You're not that Jeep dude down the road. You want to have the car corner flat and prevent any body roll that you deem excessive. So matching your front and your rear sway bars is pretty important. You can put a huge sway bar in the back, something like girthy, like 2-inch diameter or something, a drag bar. And that car is going to plow around corners. You want to be able to transfer some of the weight onto the front end. However, if your car came without a factory or sway bar, it's going to roll and not handle what you'd consider good. Actually, roll can be fast. I've actually heard of people that buy those, $3 or $4 sign suspension kits that say they go faster in the autocross by actually removing her rear sway bar. So what I did, and what's actually pretty helpful, is raid the parts bin. So I have a frame mount rear sway bar off of a 98 to 03-ish two-door Blazer. And I'll show you that, what it looks like on the car. And for the front bar, I have a heavy-duty, like 87 to 92 Firebird Camaro WS6 Z28 types front sway bar. So the stock sway bar in the rear mounts to your control arms. Getting that off the control arm allows your rear end to pivot and float better and hug the curves of the road. and putting that bigger front sway bar on, if they're hollow especially, whether it's a 34 or 36 or 38 or whatever millimeter, they're hollow, they take some weight off, but more importantly, they're more stiff, and it helps prevent roll. But they're not so stiff that the car plows through the corner, and it's a good match, these two, I found. These are like 20 bucks. I think I bought mine at the salvage yard, and it was sitting in the car. These, they can be harder to find. They're getting older, but it's not uncommon to get them for 40 or 50 bucks. Hopefully I haven't lost your attention yet. We're getting to the end of the list. Geometry. We're not talking just about SOHCAHTOA and trig from high school geometry. We're talking about caster and camber. So one of the biggest issues with the G-body suspension is if you ever jacked one up with totally stock setup, at full drop, if the car's on jack stands, the inside of the tire tucks in. That's desirable to turn corners if it's at the other side of the suspension movement. The issue with G-bodies is that they were designed for coke addicts of the 70s to have a luxurious experience and not oversteer, understeer, whatever the car out. So this isn't an ideal setup, but it was good for what the car was designed for, being a transportation appliance. What you want to do is you want the tire to lean in at the top. You want some negative caster gain as you go through the suspension travel. You don't want the tire like this at the bottom of your suspension travel when it's down. That's how a G-body is. You want it so when you're up, that tire's kind of vertical. And when you're all the way down in your suspension, the top of the tire should pull in. And you can do that with taller, lower ball joints. That's a really common upgrade, and they're cheap. 40 bucks, 50 bucks for the pair. And remember when I talked about wear? Your ball joints are probably shot anyway, so that's a good way to get, hey, fix your wear, get that under control. And your geometry, get that under control. So with taller, lower ball joints, it's quick, easy replacement, and you can get your caster and camber in a little bit better happy range. Important to talk about. And I promise, the last thing for geometry is a good alignment. So you see this factory G-body settings? I steal mine from GNT Type. These old 20-year-old Grand National websites. This is one of the best sites to know how to align your car at home affordably. So one issue is stock G-body stuff has very little camber, and you want negative camber. So that tolerance is pretty fat. Getting these performance settings dialed in, usually at home or finding a good shop, is where you're going to be on this. And number 5, let's say you have $1.50 to $2 sign budget. You've done all that stuff, that wear, your springs, your sway bars, your geometry. You have a little bit of money left over. You're able to save up some pennies. You're looking to gain a little bit more performance, but still on a budget. Good thing to tackle is some control arms. So if you're putting some power down, your rear control arms have a big effect into your wheel hop and how you put the power down. So your upper control arms help center your rear end and adjust your pinion angle. A lot of the times, G-bodies, one of these, the rear end is not very centered in the car. It can be off an inch, half an inch to the left or right. Getting that rear centered is helpful, and also the pinion angle adjusting is a beneficial thing. And the lower control arms, boxing them if you have a welder, or purchasing some and replacing the bushings with something more firm, like a poly or a spherical steel, aluminum style or steel joint, is definitely helpful. That helps reduce your deflection and wheel hop. I've been through lots of efforts trying to figure out what causes wheel hop. I've done sway bars, I've done upper control arms, I did bushings, I did boxing them, and I noticed what helps the most, and it was basically an on-off switch between wheel hop and not wheel hop, was replacing the lower bushings with a poly instead of the stock rubber. Another helpful thing is your fast ratio steering box. So if you got a car with the F41, which is your performance handling package, you can probably neglect this, possibly just adjust the preload on the input bearings, maybe replace a seal. The box is probably okay if it's fast ratio. You can step to like another parts bin part from your Firebird Camaros and go with like a Z28 WS6 steering box. They're even faster ratio still, and they've got some like steering stops, so if you have really fat tires in the front and they're hitting the frame, that 3rd gen Firebird Camaro steering box can help free up some clearance. It'll reduce your steering circle though. Another option is to add some caster and camber on your front suspension. So your caster is how far that tire leans back. That really controls when you're turning, how much does that tire want to snap back straight. It's basically what's causing it to center, like a caster wheel on a shopping cart. Camber, as we talked, is that tilt of that wheel. Remember when we were talking about that geometry on the upper control arm, lower control arm, with the added lower ball joint height? Adding an upper control arm that's aftermarket can actually help pull that alignment in, add some caster, add some camber. So now that we got through the list, let's go to the car and actually see some of the parts that I've chatted about in action. Okay, I'm going to try to start from the top down and discuss wear first. So this car had about 80,000 miles when I got it. It sat for about 20 years before I started doing anything with it. It was in decent shape, however, like I said, the front suspension on this was worn out. I replaced all the drag links, the tie rod ends, and they're relatively affordable. It's basic, easy to do stuff. So sliding underneath the car here, you see I've got relatively new inner and outer tie rods, drag link, all the components there. And that helped a lot. Also, my ball joints were shot. As I discussed, something that really helps is taller lower ball joints. So if you've ever seen a stock G-body, that rubber boot right there is usually not that tall. Adding that half-inch longer lower ball joint actually lowers your car effectively a little bit, frees up some suspension travel, and allows the upper control arm, I have an aftermarket one, but allows the upper control arm to sit in a better curve. So when that control arm on the bottom, you generally want that flat. You generally want your tie rod end here flat to prevent bump steer. And the taller the spindle effective height you get, the more that upper control arm tilts inwards at the top. And as your tire goes through suspension travel, that control arm swings up and it gets effectively shorter at a faster rate than the bottom one, which causes the tire to tip in. So that's kind of the key for your front suspension. Something else I didn't mention that's actually really helpful, and I just recently did, was these orange bump stops. They look like a carrot under there. The stock G-body bump stop, once you get the car to like kind of an acceptable ride height with these lower control arms horizontal to the ground, they're not very far away from the frame. And it's kind of like punching concrete that's carpeted. Like, it feels soft initially, but it's pretty darn hard. These little foam bump stops help absorb some of the impact, and it's more of a high rate spring, and it actually kind of dampens out the bottoming out when you hit a bump. So let's say you do hit a bump with these bump stops, it's not such a jarring experience, and it doesn't upset the suspension as much. So now that we're done with wear, we discussed springs. So these are Moog 5660s. They're shorter. These are actually uncut, and they're honestly a little bit soft. I got a heavy AC car, iron LS engine with blower, so it's probably could use a slightly heavier spring, but I'll throw a picture in the end. It actually has a really awesome ride height, totally uncut. It's comfortable, but not harsh. and it, I think, handles decently well. Another thing, moving on, sway bars. So the front sway bar here, this is a like $40 sway bar I got off of a 3rd generation Z28 Camaro. You'll probably be in about 50 bucks for everything with new tie rod in, or with new inlinks and new bushings. The factory bushings don't work, but the C-clamps that hold them in do. You just have to slide a couple of washers in there. So that's pretty much everything on the front suspension for now. Let's slide over to the back suspension and we can talk a little bit about things back there. And back at the rear axle side. So first thing, wear. What do your shocks look like? What do your bushings look like? If your bushings are shot, it's a good idea just to throw a set of polyurethanes in them. Maybe weld the lower control arms boxed. I went to like the Ace Hardware or your local box store that has the little rack for metal supplies. You can pick up some 1/8 inch thick plate, box them up pretty easily, or buying a relatively affordable set of already boxed ones is definitely not going to break the budget. They're sub $100 for them most of the time. Moving out from wear into the sway bar situation. Like I said, this is a 98 to 02 two-wheel or two-door. From my understanding, 2 or 4-wheel drive is the same. Sway bars. The factory sway bar mounts on the lower control arms through these holes right there and there. Problem with that is that can restrict movement of the rear suspension, and offboarding it to the frame actually helps. So this sway bar is flipped upside down from its factory orientation from the S10 Blazer, but it mounts conveniently in a spot on this frame brace. I just got a leftover inlink that I had from a car, and it's about 1.5 inches long spacer in the front. I did buy some new U-bolt clamps and bushings and put it in here, and it actually is a pretty good drag sway bar. It's about 1 inch in diameter. It prevents sway relatively well in turns and launches decently straight. So this bar I probably have $25 in, actually, just painted and bushings and the bar itself. So definitely a fun option, and works well for low cost. Having a higher or better steering feel is also pretty in demand. Something that I had on my box, this car I'm lucky enough to have is already F41 equipped, so I have the high ratio performance box with the 4 bolts. And I have an LS, of course, so depending on your engine, your hoses might be different, but the input shaft seal here, yes, that's input shaft seal there. There's a small bearing in there, and if that shaft seal is going out, you can replace that and reset the preload on that box. Or if it's worn out, you can adjust that. Remember, it is left-hand thread, reverse thread, left-hand thread. So if you want to tighten it up, you loosen it, and that can help increase the steering depending on how bad it is. And your good old solid steering shaft, this is out of like a boxy Jeep Grand Cherokee, an earlier one, like a 91 or so. This has actual U-joints in it instead of rubber rag joints, and that can help reduce some play in your steering. The last thing, costs. What is this, everything I've been talking about, to get your G-body from old grandma car that sat in the field into something that can handle? What's the pain? Well, everything associated to wear, your steering links, your bushings, your shocks, your ball joints. About $100 on shocks. KYB, I found, has a decent rebate about every year, where 1 or 2 or 3 times a year you can get 20, 30, 40 bucks off. So I've paid about $100 for my shocks. $75, that's for your bushings, your upper lower control arm bushings. It's going to be more if you decide to go with like an Energy Suspensions polyurethane kit, but if you go with stock stuff, rubber. It's usually pretty good in the front. You don't have the high shock loads like you do in the rear. So you can save a little bit of money there. Could be more, but 75 is a good shot. Steering, I'm just assuming everything's bad. Your inner and outer links on quality stuff, about 20 bucks per inner and outer tie rod. So about $80 there, 20 bucks for your idler arm, about 50 bucks for your center link. Grease, I'm just saying you have that, and cotter pins comes with it. So about 150 for your steering parts, and then I threw in $50 for ball joints for your uppers. Your lowers I'm including down there in geometry. And then if you want to get your steering shaft rebuild kit, those are cheap. Or steering box rebuild kit, those are cheap. Or steering shaft from like a junkyard. Look at about $400 there. And a lot of this isn't included in your expensive 3-letter acronym kits, which it's fine if you buy one of those kits, but that $400, you're gonna probably have to spend that anyways, unless you go with a really expensive kit with like $1,200 adjustable shocks, coilovers or something. Springs. So fronts, 56, 58, 60, 62, 64s. They're all generally the same price, plus or minus 10, 20 bucks. So I'm saying 60 bucks for the front. And rear, I've used 5401s. They allowed the car to sit pretty even. 60 bucks for those two for the pair. So $120 for springs, front and rear. Sway bars. Like I mentioned, rob the parts bin, hit up your junkyard. Yes, if you have to buy these new or new reproductions, they're going to cost more. This is a budget build. You're going to the junkyard. You like walking around and seeing old cars. So 50 bucks for the front with bushings and in links, 30 bucks for the rear. That's about what I have in mind. So right around 80 bucks for your sway bars. Geometry and alignment and lower ball joints, I'm saying is 150. Depending on the alignment shop, if you do it yourself, I mean, that can be more or less. The lower ball joints, they're about 50 a shot. It depends on what kind of a shop you find that does an alignment. Good ones, honestly, that could be 150 for the alignment only. But if you're doing it yourself, like I did, if you can do some simple math, can read a tape measure, can read an angle gauge that you have, 150 is not unreasonable. So total damage, about $750. So for under $1,000, you can piece this together over 6 months or a year. 5 minutes, an hour, a night, just getting stuff out. You can really put together a suspension handling kit that really helps. I didn't include everything on this. You know, your ball joint boots if you tore in one, but you don't need to replace it. You know, it's really going to be affected by what you need. The lower control arm front bump stops that I said, those are like $16 or $18 off eBay. So, you know, you're looking maybe $850, depending on what tax you live. I mean, what I'm saying is under $1,000 versus like $3,500 for some of those kits. So this isn't going to be Corvette killing suspension, but it's going to bring your car up to a level where it's comfortable, but more performance oriented. You can sit in for 6 hours and you're not going to get beat to death, as long as your exhaust isn't trumpeting away in the back. So that's the good start. That's what I have on my car. I'm happy with it. And more, well, that depends on how crazy you get. If you want adjustable shocks, maybe double adjustable coilovers, aftermarket control arms. If you go crazy with other stuff, you know, you want stuff painted, powder coated, you know, anything is going to cost you 600 bucks at least. A good set of adjustable shocks I've looked at, you know, they're not cheap. They're probably $800. Aftermarket control arms, I mean, the bottom ones, they're probably okay, but the uppers, you do gain something from added caster and camber. I mean, I'm not going to criticize you if you do because I have adjustables on my car. Upper control arm adjustment, we've talked about that. That helps dial your pinion angle in, but making sure the front end handles well isn't a bad idea before you handle that rear stuff. So spend the money on that stuff first. You know, your wear, your springs, your sway bar, your geometry, before you go into your more expensive upgrades, or just panic press that $1,300 to $2,500, $4,000 kit online. So hopefully I helped you out. Thanks for watching. Do your thing. Get in the garage and get your stuff done.